Ciao a tutti, come va? Spero bene. Quest'oggi siamo qui per parlare di Angular. Abbiamo un grandissimo speaker internazionale, perciò il talk poi si svolgerà in inglese e io passerò adesso a presentarlo in inglese. So, we are ItalianCoders and we are live on YouTube and Facebook channel. We have also a Discord server, and in this server we talk about many different arguments like Angular, and also with many other languages like C#, Go, and Java, of course. So today we have a great speaker. He's a Google developer expert, and he's a very great developer. So welcome, Manfred.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
How is it going?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. I'm here at home in Austria, in Styria, so I'm not that far from Italy. And yeah, I'm excited to be here today.
Okay. So today we will talk about microfrontends. Is a great topic. So don't hesitate to make some question after the talk. We have a Q&A time, so we will answer at every question about Angular, of course. Okay, so Manfred, the stage is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I have already shared my screen, and here is it. So first of all, I've learned it by heart. Buonasera a tutti. This is about federated Angular, which is about microfrontend and module federation with Angular. And I want to start with the most famous Italian, namely with Leonardo da Vinci. Perhaps you know him. I'm sure you know him. In 1400 something, he designed a helicopter. He only designed it. He was not capable of building it because he did not have the right material. But nowadays we have the right materials, and scientists found out it would really fly. How cool is that? Well, this story reminds me somehow to microfrontends, because the idea is everything but new. The idea has been around since several years, but so far we didn't have the right tools, the right materials to build it. But now we have with module federation. But first of all, what do I mean when I'm referring to microfrontends? Well, I mean several tiny frontends which are implemented by different teams, and then they are integrated at runtime. We are just loading all those microfrontends into a shell. And this was quite difficult in the past. Loading something that has been differently deployed, differently compiled, differently developed into a shell needed a lot of tricks, a lot of workarounds. But nowadays we have module federation, which arrived with Webpack 5. Webpack 5 was published several months ago. And this is what this talk is about. First of all, I want to tell you what module federation is about. And then I want to show you how combine module federation with the Angular CLI. And furthermore, I will show you a possible roadmap. I'm sure you will like these features. And then the next question will be, when can we use it safely for production stuff? But first of all, let me introduce myself. I am Manfred. I'm a trainer and consultant for Angular. My focus is on Angular for enterprise applications, and I'm doing a lot of workshops in this area. In days like this, the workshops are done remotely, which really works nicely. It really works well. Besides this, I'm quite connected to the Angular community. I live in Austria. I do a lot of stuff in Germany. And I'm always happy if I can visit other countries around the world, or if I can work together with people from there via remote. Okay, so let's get started with the first chapter of this presentation. This first chapter is about module federation. And first of all, we need to clarify what module federation is doing for us, which issue module federation is solving for us. And well, more or less, it is answering this very question here, namely how to load separately compiled code. Perhaps you say now, well, come on, Manfred, that cannot be that difficult. I mean, we have dynamic imports, and even before we had the require statement. So why not use this dynamic import? Why not use a require statement to aim to another application to fetch something from this application into our very own shell? Well, my answer is, in theory, this would work perfectly. In theory. In practice, this does not work at all with modern bundling solutions like Webpack or the CLI, which is incorporating Webpack. This does not work at all because those bundling solutions assume that everything is there at compile time. Everything is compiled together, everything is optimized together, think on tree shaking, for instance, and then, and only then, everything is loaded into, or then everything is cut into chunks that can be loaded into our application using lazy loading. But only then. And this is too late, because when we talk about micro frontends, we don't know about this stuff upfront. We only know about it at runtime when we try to load it in our shell, for instance. So we need a better solution for this. And this better solution is module federation. Module federation defines two roles of applications. The first role is the host. I'm also referring to it as the shell, the micro frontend shell, which loads all the micro frontends on demand. And the second role is the remote. In our case, this is just a micro frontend. It also could be some other kind of plugin. With module federation, you can configure both of them. For instance, you can configure the shell in order to define some mapped URLs. Here I have mapped the URL mfe1, which stands for micro frontend 1. It's very creative, I know. And micro frontend 1 is pointing over to another application. And over there, it's also called mfe1. That means here I could define an alias. I could say, well, here it's called mfe1, over there it's called Batman. Here it's called Manfred, over there it's called Bruce Wayne. But I didn't want to do this. That's why I have defined a non-alias. Over there, I can expose files. I can say, hey, I want to expose this file with an Angular component, with an Angular module, or just with a function. And when exposing files, I'm assigning a pretty path for it. And now something beautiful happens. Now you can use a dynamic import to point over there and to load something from over there. And the best of this is Angular does not even recognize that we are loading something that has been compiled and deployed separately. From Angular's perspective, this is just like lazy loading. That means we don't need some extra libraries orchestrating our applications. No, we can use Angular as is. And underneath the covers, Webpack is taking care of the heavy lifting. It is taking care of loading something that was separately compiled and deployed and giving this to Angular so that Angular can work with it. At the end of the day, we use Angular as is. We don't need any separate frameworks for dealing with microfrontends. Of course, we need some metadata. We need metadata about the microfrontends, and also this metadata is emitted by Webpack. Webpack creates a so-called remote entry or remote entry point for all the micro frontends. And this remote entry file needs to be loaded into the shell. And so the shell knows how to interact with this micro frontend, how to load it, and which are the dependencies it needs. Perhaps it needs Angular, perhaps it needs NGRX, perhaps it needs Bootstrap. So first of all, we need to load this metadata. One of the coolest things is we can even share dependencies. We can say, hey, let's share Angular core. We need it here, we need it there. Let's just load it once and share it. And this is vital, because just imagine you had 10 micro frontends. Having 10 micro frontends does not mean that you want to load Angular itself 10 times. In an ideal world, we would just load it once and share it across those 10 micro frontends. Of course, now the next question is, how can we use this all together with Angular and especially with the Angular CLI? And here I have a good message for you. The Angular CLI is already using Webpack underneath the covers. This is the good message. The bad message is that the CLI is shielding Webpack from us. Well, most of the times, this is a good message because honestly, we do not want to get in touch with all the details of Webpack. It can become quite difficult. But in this case now, we want to get in touch with Webpack because we want to tell Webpack, hey, Webpack, please use this module federation config to deal with micro frontends. That means we need to find a way to directly communicate with Webpack, which sits behind the covers. And for this, we could go with a custom builder. Perhaps you know it, the CLI is using a builder concept. Think about it like about an strategy, an exchangeable strategy, which is building libraries and applications for you. The default implementation for Angular applications is directly delegating to Webpack. We could now write a custom implementation that is delegating the configuration, the module federation config to Webpack, and then we can trigger Webpack underneath the covers to do what it is doing all the time, namely to create an application. So at the end of the day, this custom builder just needs to delegate the config, and then it needs to delegate to Webpack. This is about 10 lines of code in the core and a lot of boilerplate around it, a lot of boilerplate that makes it work seamlessly as a custom builder that can be plugged into the Angular CLI. Of course, you could write something like this by hand, but you don't have to because I already did it. I already wrote such a plugin for you. It's called Angular Architects Module Federation. And basically, besides several additional things, several advanced things, it does 3 things for you. First of all, it generates the skeleton for a module federation config. That means you don't need to learn this config by heart. You don't have to work with snippets. Everything is in place. You just have to fill in placeholders. This is the first thing. The second thing is it enables module federation underneath the covers by installing a custom builder. And the third thing is it is assigning a new board to your applications to make it possible to run them side by side for testing and debugging. If you have 10 micro frontends, normally you want to run them side by side. What do you need to get this plugin? Well, you just need to ng edit. Then you need to adjust a generated configuration. And then you need to ng serve your micro frontends and your shell to try everything out. That's all. And now I would say, let's have a look at this. I have brought a simple demonstration that shows all of this in action. So in this simple demonstration, I have a shell. This is my first application. And I have a micro front end. This is my second application. As you see here, the micro front end runs on localhost 3000, and the shell itself runs on localhost 5000. This is not a prerequisite. You don't have to have different origins, different servers, different ports. But I'm using it here because it proves that we are talking about two separately compiled, two separately deployed applications. And if I click here on flights, the micro front end from over there is loaded into my shell. So let's redo it, but now let's have a look at the network then. If we look here, let's zoom in a bit. And if I click there, you see this chunk from the other destination, from the other origin is loaded lazily. It's loaded on demand. But it's really more than traditional lazy loading because it comes from a different origin. One more time, this comes from localhost 3000. Our shell runs on localhost 5000. Besides this chunk only has 11.6 Ks. And I think this really proves that Angular itself is shared. We don't need to load Angular one more time. Angular is shared between the shell and this very microfront. That's quite cool, isn't it? It's incredible, if you ask me. So, of course, now the big question is, how can we implement it? Well, I implemented this within a mono repository. You don't need a mono repository. You can also go with several separate repositories, but for the sake of simplicity, I just go with a mono repository. Of course, you have to ng add the plugin we've talked about. You have to ng add it to the shell, and you have to ng add it to the micro frontend. And when doing this, the plugin generates a Webpack config for those applications. Here we have a Webpack config for micro frontend. And if we look in here, it is not a big Webpack config. It is just a partial Webpack config. It just contains what we need for module federation. The rest is still a part of the Angular CLI. The rest is still generated by the Angular CLI, but we need to provide this tiny configuration for the module federation plugin. When it comes to the micro frontend, we need to define a name for the micro frontend. Should be a unique name. We need to define a name for the remote entry file. You remember, this is the file with all the metadata describing this very micro frontend. And we need to expose modules. For instance, here I am exposing an Angular module. It's a flight module with some subroutes. I'm exposing it under the name module. That means the shell can directly lazy load this flights module. And if we do lazy loading with the router, we can directly route to its child routes. Also here I'm defining that I want to share Angular core, Angular common, and the router. I don't want to load it several times. If we look into the shell, we have the same. If we look into the shell, we also have a traditional Angular application. It's really a traditional one plus a Webpack config. And in here, we also have the module federation plugin configured. This module federation plugin points to my micro frontend. It maps the URL MFE1. It defines that over there, it is also called MFE1. And it defines the location of the remote entry point. The remote entry point holding our metadata. Of course, this here is quite hard-coded, isn't it? This is what I'm calling static federation. It is the easiest way to get started, and it is quite easy for debugging purposes. But when it comes to production usage, you need a more dynamic way. You need to go with an alternative that is called dynamic federation. Here, for the time being, I will stick with static federation, but please keep in mind, you do not need to provide all this information upfront. You can use some API calls at runtime to provide this information after the start of the shell, for instance. That means you can start the shell, you can ask the server, hey server, which microfrontends can you provide? And with all the information from the server, you can configure module federation dynamically. If you are interested in this more dynamic scenario, look up my blog. There are some blog articles about this. Besides this, I'm also defining my libraries I want to share. Angular Core, Common, and the Road. And that's it. So on both sides, I have traditional Angular applications plus such a Webpack config. Of course, now we need to tell the shell to load MFE1 on demand. And for this, my shell has a routing config, a router config with a lazy route. If you look here at first sight, this looks like a traditional lazy route, doesn't it? We have a path, we have load children, we have a dynamic import. So from Angular's perspective, this is just about lazy loading, from Angular's perspective. But Webpack underneath the covers knows that this path is a mapped path, that this path points over to our separately deployed microfrontend, and that it needs to load it when this URL is requested. Of course, to ease the TypeScript compiler a bit, we need a type definition file, a DTS file. And this DTS file just tells the TypeScript compiler, hey, TypeScript compiler, you don't need to be afraid. You don't need to be afraid that this doesn't exist. It will be there at runtime. Trust me, I'm an expert. It will be there. And so the TypeScript compiler is fine with this. It does not complain about a file name that does not exist at runtime anymore. And that's it. Now we can route to this flights path, and automatically module federation will load the separately compiled microfrontend into our shell like we have seen it before. So perhaps you say, wow, this is very nice because it allows us to deal with microfrontends. It allows us to load, let's call it plugins at runtime. When can we use it? Well, and also here I have several good messages for you and one bad message. One good message is that Webpack 5 and module federation is final. This works for you. However, the bad message is that the Angular CLI 11 is not officially supporting Webpack 5. It is still going with Webpack 4. However, there is an experimental opt-in for Webpack 5. So we can experiment with it, we can try it out, but it is not ready for prime time. For prime time, we need to wait for CLI 12. But with CLI 12, which is due in May, give or take some weeks, we will get an official Webpack 5 integration, and then everything will work seamlessly. So start now with prototyping, with experimenting, and start with building for production in May, in some month, in May 2021, when Webpack 5 is fully integrated into CLI 12. Well, if you like this talk, then perhaps you will also like my free ebook. I've updated it some weeks ago. Now it contains 5 chapters about module federation and some additional chapters about other stuff you need when using Angular in the enterprise. You can download it for free at angulararchitect.co/book. Let me come to a conclusion. We have seen that module federation allows to load something that was separately compiled and deployed. This is the key for micro frontends. We need this for micro frontends. We also need this for plugin-based systems. And we have seen we can combine all of this with Angular. Everything we need is this plugin we install into our application, and then the CLI is capable of using module federation. And there is one last thing I want to remember you. If you forget everything, please always remember this one last thing, namely, this is the perfect time for you to become the next Leonardo da Vinci. Where is it? The next Leonardo da Vinci. Here is he with his helicopter. So take your chance and become the next Leonardo. Well, thanks for having me. Here you find all my contact data. You find the slides in my blog, and if you like, follow me on Twitter so that we can stay in contact. Thanks for this. Chacho, are you still here?
Yeah. Great talk. We have a few questions. Okay.
Great.
And the first one is, how can I share CSS styles from one micro frontend to another?
Yeah. So there is not an official solution for this, but there are several ways for it. One approach might be to just load your CSS file into your application shell and to reuse the defined styles, the defined classes in all the loaded micro frontends. This is one approach. Another approach would be to define a skeleton for your CSS styling, and each and every micro frontend can fork it and use it for their own need. This gives them a lot of freedom, but you get also a lot of redundancies. And one solution in the middle would be to share a style library with your implemented design system. And this style library could also provide CSS stuff. So as you see here, you have several possibilities. And regarding on what you choose, you have more or less coupling and more or less redundancies.
Okay. We have a question from Davide. It could be stored in a JSON file that can be loaded at runtime.
What do you mean with it? What can be stored in a JSON file?
I think the path of micro frontends.
Oh yeah, totally. That's a good idea. In my case, I just hard-coded it, but if we go with what I'm calling dynamic federation, we could just load a JSON file. Perhaps it is a static JSON file with all the key data pointing to the micro frontends, or perhaps it is a dynamic JSON file coming from some backend server. I would call it a lookup server or a registry server. Yeah, that works too.
Okay, David added, for example, CSS via JSON could be shared via Spring Cloud config. So yeah. JSON for the CSS, can be shared.
That's possible. I mean, it can be literally everything. If your Angular application can read it and work with it, it can be everything. And so at the end of the day, you need to send some information over the wire via HTTP.
Yeah, okay. So about the CSS. Another question. Another question.
Well, I'm not aware of such a solution in the world of Angular. I have seen something like this in the world of React. Perhaps you mean if we can bundle it, if we can bundle our CSS with the micro frontend, and yeah, here the answer is yes. This is also possible. Everything Webpack can do can also be done by module federation. You just need a loader that incorporates your CSS in the bundle in the form of JSON or in the form of a big string that is part of your bundle. That's possible, if this was what the question was about.
Okay, thanks. And we have also this question. Monorepo can be a good approach with microfrontends, or you will lose all the benefits?
It can be a good approach, yeah. It forces you to have one version of everything. That means you cannot find out at runtime that the micro frontend does not work with the shell because you've used two completely different Angular versions with completely different, not compatible nature versions. And in general, going with a monorepo is the simpler approach. However, if you want to mix and match, let's say, different libraries like RxJS7, RxJS6, then using the monorepo is not suitable. In this case, you need separate repositories, which means separate repositories gives you a lot of freedom, but it gives you also a bit of pain because now everything is distributed and now you have to make sure that you are loading the right dependencies into your repository, dependencies that can work with each other when this micro frontend and that micro frontend are loaded at runtime into your shell. So yeah, try to get started with a monorepo. If this not suits your needs, you can migrate to multiple repos.
Okay, we didn't have any other question. So the talk was incredible, really, really great. And
thank you.
I will run to change all my applications to module federation approach. Yeah. And
Please don't do
so
it. Just don't do it for fun because it's a lot of work. But if it is beneficial, yeah, try it out.
Okay, thanks all to be here today, and thanks Manfred to be here with us, and also for your time and your knowledge.
I thank you. Mille grazie.
Don't hesitate to inscribe yourself to the channel for the next for being informed for the next talks. And we have another question right now. This one. What about Angular 12 module federation will be a part of the default CLI?
Good question. So Webpack 5 will be a part of CLI 12, and module federation is a part of Webpack 5. And so indirectly you get it. Just migrate to CLI 12 and you will get module federation underneath the covers. In order to activate it, you still need this plugin I've shown you.
Okay. And Angular 12 will be released in April, I suppose.
I think it will be May, give or take some weeks.
Okay. So thank you very much again, and see you, I hope, in person in some conference.
Yeah, it would be great. See you.
Bye everyone. Thanks for being here.
Ciao.
Bye.